Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And Paranormal Expeditions.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Paranormal Expeditions. Another way Ron's Amazing Stories takes you away from today. Of course, when you really have to get away, what better way is there than a 5-minute mystery?
The usual peace and quiet of a small college town was disturbed one day last summer when Inspector Brass received a phone call from Dr. Jonathan Brown, professor of chemistry at the university.
Inspector, you've got to come right away. Something terrible. My wife has been poisoned.
I'll be right up. Don't disturb anything.
I'll do what you say, Inspector. Goodbye.
Doc, I want a rush autopsy. Grab your stuff and hurry up to Dr. Brown's place at 1412 Church Avenue. Says his wife is dead. Poisoned. How did you know, Dr. Brown, that your wife died from poison?
Being a chemist, I am well acquainted with poisons and their effects. As soon as I saw my wife, I knew that her physical appearance could only have been the result of poison.
Do you keep any drugs or poisons around the house?
Yes, I do. I sometimes work in my laboratory in the cellar.
Mm-hmm. Members of the household could get to the stuff rather easily, then.
Yes, I'm afraid so. I haven't been too careful with just the nurse, the cook, and myself around.
I understand that your wife has been ill for quite some time.
Yes, 10 years. She was an invalid for the past 2 years. We've had Miss Calthorne as her constant companion and nurse all these years.
Are you Miss Calthorne?
Yes, I am.
She's been very wonderful to my wife. Took care of her better than a mother cares for a child. Did everything. Washed her, dressed her, tasted her food to make sure it wasn't too hot or cold or badly seasoned. Read to her. I've been very grateful.
Is that right, Miss Calthorne?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Brown trusted me completely. She was my friend. It was a horrible accident.
What'd you find, Doc?
Poison, just like her husband said, acted within a quarter of an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
No, not right now.
Well, see you in the morgue. So long.
So long. Miss Calthorne, were you with Mrs. Brown all the time?
Yes, sir. While I was feeding her, she was seized by a spasm and gagged and became discolored. I've been nursing for 20 years, and I've seen the symptoms of poison before. I gave her something to counteract the poison, but the poison acted too quickly.
When did Dr. Brown finally get there?
By the time I arrived, my wife was dead. I don't blame Miss Calthorne. She did the best she could. I think it was a terrible accident.
Well, Dr. Brown, I disagree. It wasn't an accident. Miss Calthorne, would you be so kind as to accompany me to headquarters? You're under arrest for murder.
What made the inspector so sure that it was murder? In a moment we'll know, but first...
Okay, I am sure that this one assumes facts not in evidence because I don't see any holes in her story.
You hear, but you do not listen.
Okay, I know what comes next. You're going to say something smart-alecky and make me look, well, dumb.
I don't have to make you look stupid. You do that all by yourself.
Nice.
Just ask yourself, who tasted the food? And I think you will get it.
Oh, that does make sense.
I thought it might. Are you ready for the solution?
I am.
And now, back to our story.
Rather unusual, Miss Calthorne. You didn't care who was suspected, including yourself. But you made one slip. You agreed with the doctor when he said that you did everything for Mrs. Brown, including tasting her food. If the food was accidentally poisoned, you would have died too. Therefore, Mrs. Brown must have been poisoned during or after her meal. You talked her into believing she was poisoned by the food. So she would do anything to save herself. That is, take your so-called remedy. Only it wasn't a remedy. It was poison.
she was the food taster, so the nurse should have died as well.
You bloody well got it.
I did, and what's more important is that the nurse got it too.
Justice is a dish best served cold.
Yeah, right. This 5-Minute Mystery was brought to you by Paranormal Expeditions.
What's that you say?
Welcome to the podcast. We present a brand new segment today called Paranormal Expeditions. I think you're going to like the concept, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Also on the show, Mitchell tells a few stories from Selma, California, and we have a classic sci-fi story from the pulp mags that really relates to our world today. It is titled Seller of the Sky. So let's get started with this from Audible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to right now? Rivals, Frenemies Who Changed the World by Scott McCormick. This title is an Audible exclusive, and without a minute of hesitation, I dub it a hilarious narrative of history fit for all ages. Did you know that most of our dinosaur fossils were discovered because two grown men absolutely hated each other? It's true, and this book tells that story and many others. Here's a clip.
When we think of rivalries and feuds, we often think of warring families or groups of people caught up in a pointless, destructive, and bitter hostility.
You stole my pig!
The feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys, which, yes, was partially about a pig, lasted for 13 years and led to the death of over a dozen people. History is littered with such family feuds. There are also many famous rivalries between individuals. Actresses Bette Davis and Joan Crawford had a rivalry that lasted decades.
You stole my man.
And while these rivalries are all fascinating, they haven't left much of a lasting mark on the world. There are some rivalries, however, pointless, petty, embarrassing, disgraceful, and even bloody rivalries that have helped to shape history.
You stole my bones!
These are the rivalries that changed the world. Okay, let's do this. Round 1. Cope versus Marsh. This nasty rivalry between two eminent scientists has got it all. Name-calling, rock-throwing, explosions, political scandals, dinosaurs, and the bountiful pits of New Jersey.
Jersey!
It's a feud that lasted for nearly 30 years, embarrassed the entire scientific community, and led to numerous mistakes that continue to baffle paleontologists to this day. Kids, have you ever seen a baffled paleontologist? It's not a pretty sight. We don't recommend it. The thing of it is, this whole bewildering brouhaha boiled down to one simple fact. Professor O.C. Marsh wanted all the bones. When we say that Othniel Charles Marsh wanted all the bones, we mean just that. He literally wanted every single bone buried in the entire country to be his and his alone. That greedy desire is what started the feud between Marsh and his rival, Edward Drinker Cope. It's what destroyed their careers, and it turned paleontology into a full-contact sport. But their rivalry also sparked the greatest era of dinosaur discovery, helped cement a bold theory about the development of life on Earth, and propelled America to the forefront of the scientific age. So, there's that. It all began the way so many feuds do, as a friendship. The two scientists met in Berlin, Germany in 1864. Marsh had recently been hired by Yale as America's first professor of paleontology. The self-taught Cope, though not a professor, had already made a name for himself by publishing 37 scientific papers. He was only 23 years old. Though 9 years older, Marsh had only published 2 papers. So Marsh was impressed with the young man. The two roamed around Europe, taking in the sights, talking about dinosaurs, and just generally avoiding being drafted into the American Civil War.
I say, drinking beer in Berlin sure beats dying in a ditch in Virginia. Cheers!
The two men formed a fast friendship. They corresponded with each other upon returning to the U.S., and even went so far as to name new species after each other. How did everything go so wrong? They went to New Jersey.
Jersey!
But first, a little background. Today, we take dinosaurs for granted. We play with dinosaur toys, read books about dinosaurs, and we watch people get devoured by dinosaurs in movies. Every child today knows the basic story behind these creatures who lived millions of years ago. But in the early 1800s, people didn't know what to make of those enormous bones that were being unearthed around the world. Back then, people were having a hard time with the idea that the world could possibly be more than 6,000 years old. After all, famous scientists like Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton thought the world had been created around 4000 BC. Famed theologian Archbishop James Ussher used the Bible to calculate that the world had been created on, and this is real, Saturday, October 23rd, 4004 BC, at 9 a.m., just in time for brunch. However, books being written in the 1800s, like Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species and Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, suggested the Earth might be, get this, hundreds of millions of years old. And while at first that seemed like an outlandish concept, the fact that people were finding the remains of enormous creatures like Megalosaurus seemed to back that up. Okay, let's go to New Jersey.
Jersey!
In 1858, America's first complete dinosaur was discovered in a pit in Haddonfield. The man who discovered the bones contacted a University of Pennsylvania professor named Joseph Leidy.
After careful analysis, using the most advanced scientific methodology, I've determined that these large lizard-like bones must have belonged to some kind of large lizard creature. So, I'm gonna name it Large Lizard.
Excuse me, Professor Leidy. That don't sound very scientific.
You're right. How about Hadrosaurus?
Well, that sure sounds fancy. What does Hadrosaurus mean?
It's Greek for large lizard.
Wow. The marvels of science.
Rivals, Frenemies Who Changed the World is a wonderfully silly book. Think of it as if Monty Python was teaching a history class. Each volume of 4 30-minute histories will dig into the petty name-calling and grumbling grudges that led to many of the world's greatest achievements, all delivered with a cheeky sense of humor. In this book, you get to choose sides. Cope or Marsh, the jerks who discovered so many dinosaurs. Hamilton or Burr, whose conflict fueled American politics. Queen Elizabeth, or the Mary Queen of Scots, who fought to rule England. Or maybe Adidas or Puma, who changed the world of sports and fashion forever. Kidnappings, rock fights, duels, and explosions. Rivals shows our world leaders at their absolute best and their worst, sometimes at the same time. Now, you can have this book today. Here is what Audible has set up for us. Audible is offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get your copy of Rivals, Frenemies Who Changed the World today. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
I received this email from Mitchell Ritchie, who lives in Selma, California. Ron, if you haven't heard the song The Ghost of Beardsley Road, I have a link for you and a couple personal stories to go with it. We had the tune in the 60s, and it always gave me a scary feeling. It was written by Dane Sturgeon. Mitchell. I, of course, was intrigued and went to listen to the song. It is a creepy tune with lots of strange laughing and that familiar 60s beach vibe. It tells the story of the strange death of a teenager found in his car who died of fright. The explanation is that he was terrorized by the ghost of Beardsley Road. Copyright laws prevent me from sharing the tune with you guys, but I will have a link to it in the show notes. Now, here are Mitchell's stories. In my early 20s, I was living in my mother's rental house. My father had passed away in an auto accident when I was about 10. In the 70s, I was burning the candle at both ends and already had an amazing career rewinding electric motors and generators all over the western United States. We worked crazy long hours in the noisiest and dirtiest conditions. I was the lead man, and that meant I got to do all of the out-of-state jobs, mostly in cement ball mills. Editor's note: I had to look up what a cement mill was. It is the equipment used to grind the hard nodular clinker from the cement kiln into the fine gray powder that is cement. Most cement is currently ground in ball mills. How about that? Now back to our story. Anyway, I was home very little, and when I did, I tried to catch up with my friends. My girlfriend and I were not getting along, so I was home alone, sleeping on the couch with my head facing the hallway to my bedroom. I woke in the middle of the night and saw a faint white figure down at the end of the hall. I was still half asleep and closed my eyes. When I reopened them, the figure was halfway down the hall, coming towards me, now brighter and flowing. I jumped up. Now, I'm 6'4", and I'm standing toe-to-toe with a pure white angel. The room was lit up. I can only describe her as the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz, only taller and more beautiful. Confused, I ran right through her down the hallway to my bedroom and didn't sleep anymore that night. I can tell you at the time I was making some marginal choices in life, and that night I slowly got back on track. Mitchell sent in another story for us. I'm now 29, 1990, and I'm vice president of sales. I met my girlfriend, who was a farmer. Her father had passed away 2 years earlier, and she lived with her mom to run the farm. After 3 months, we knew that we had a special relationship, and within 6 months, we were engaged. We had a long-distance relationship, so I would occasionally stay with them on the weekend. One night, I woke up in the spare room and rolled my feet off the bed to get up. There were a pair of men's brown shoes there. It felt like I was supposed to step into them. I didn't remember seeing them there when I went to bed. I went into the kitchen and asked my fiancée and her mother about the shoes. She ran in, checked, and said that it was her father's, and she didn't know how they got into the room. We've been married now 30 years and have raised 2 beautiful daughters in that same house. My wife and I can honestly say over the years we've had some strange stuff happen. The alarm goes off for no reason. Certain lights go on and stay on. The grinder starts up for no reason, as well as the TV. Also, the bedroom lamp would go on wake me up, and then go off. We were always on our toes and took them either as something's going to happen or heeded them as warnings. And sometimes we just thought that we were doing a good job. One more little crazy thing that we all remember. We have a second home in Morro Bay, California. One night we went to a smaller town for dinner. I got up to wash my hands, and when I came back, my wife and mother-in-law's eyes were as big as saucers. In the small restaurant, a lady came up to my wife from out of nowhere and stared at my 2-year-old daughter. My wife asked, "Can I help you?" She said, "Your girl is an angel." Proud, my wife said, "Thank you." The lady said, "No, you don't understand. She's a real angel." Mitchell Ritchie, Selma, California. Well, Mitchell, thank you for sharing your stories. Mitch left us with one more note that I just have to share. Ron, I had shoulder surgery today and couldn't sleep, and I've always wanted to share these with you. I love your program, and sometimes I can't go to sleep. Don't take this the wrong way, but I have to take 3 nights right now to get through a single episode. Laugh out loud. It calms me. You do a great job. And I guess after the 10 years or how many years I've been listening, I'm finally able to predict the endings. I also like the early space stories the most, as opposed to the ghost stories. That's my preference. Oh, and I sometimes follow your advice on Audible. Thanks, Mitchell Ritchie. Well, Mitchell, I have to say I too have trouble falling asleep sometimes and can't get through my own shows in one sitting. I don't take this as a bad thing. Rather, I like to think I'm providing an alternative to sleeping pills. Again, thank you for sharing. Those are our stories for this time. If you have one that you would like to share, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com and click on the Story Submission banner. Leave your story, give it a title, and tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can. Welcome to Paranormal Expeditions, the RAS segment that puts you right in the middle of strange things that happen when the lights go out. We will take you to the dungeons of spookiness, to the halls of terror. You'll never know where you're gonna end up or how you will escape. Let's join Ron as he heads out for another Paranormal Expedition. As promised, we are presenting a brand new segment to Ron's Amazing Stories called Paranormal Expeditions. But what is this all about? Well, we've had a lot of ghost hunters on the show, and from your response to them, you enjoy hearing their experiences and, more importantly, the places that they go. We will be bringing these people back to tell us more stories, and we will be bringing your fellow listeners on to share some of their really strange adventures in really strange places. So yet another way to take you away from today and perhaps to a place you never could have imagined. So let's bring in our first guest to Paranormal Expeditions, Emma Lynn Dowd. Emma, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great.
It is so good to have you. I'm excited because you're going to give us some local folklore right from your backyard today.
I sure am. This is such a cool place. I've been up there so many times, and so many things have happened, and I think everybody's going to love to hear the story.
Well, let me ask this. Where are we going today on our expedition?
There's a house. It's one of the most haunted houses in the state of Florida, and it's in the county of Brooksville. Now, Brooksville was named after Senator Brooks, who clubbed the northern senator right before the Civil War. And so that's where he lived, so they named the city after him. This is the May Stringer House, and it's actually called the Brooksville Heritage Museum, so you can look it up either which way on the internet. It's a beautiful house, and it was owned by several people, including the Likes family, who makes Likes hot dogs. It's got a tale of death, and it's got a lot of history. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. So, well, let's start with the history of the house. What can you tell us about it?
Okay, the house was built in 1852, and it was owned by John May and Louisa May. And what they did is they got this land based upon the fact that the northern people, they wanted to bring them down into the south and help them populate some of the land and get rid of the Native Americans. So what they did is they gave them a certain amount of, like, tons of land, and they had to be able to farm on it. But the main way to get it for the price was they had to keep the Indians off of it. So he got this land. They came down here. They had a family, and the kids unfortunately passed away. So they tried for another one, and they had a child. Her name was Jessie May. And it was right around the time of having Jessie May that John passed away. And when he passed away, Marlena took over the business, basically the farming and everything else. And she ran it as a single person. Now, in the 1800s, that was not really the thing that you saw down here as women running houses and running farms. So sadly, Jessie May passed away at the age of 2. She met this guy named Frank Saxon, who is a Civil War hero. Basically, he was injured in the Civil War up in Georgia and took the Confederate flag and walked it all the way back to Brooksville, saving the flag. Basically, that's why he became a hero. He met Marlena, and they got married, and they had kids of their own. One of those kids also passed away, but Marlena passed away in childbirth. So not only is Marlena gone, but so is the kids. And this is where the haunting started to happen. Well, Frank Saxon, he met another woman, and she didn't want to live in the same house as his first wife. So he built her a house across the street, which is called the Saxon House. And so when he moved out, it was sold to a doctor. The doctor came in and built on an extra wing. And the wing was designed so that way the patients could come into the house and not get into the rest of the house, and he could treat them because he had a practice right there. And the people that were seriously sick and dying, he brought them up to one of the towers up at the top, and they passed away up there. So there's a lot of death from just several kids have passed away, and at this point, and also John and Marlena passed away at the house as well.
Wow.
Supposedly, they haven't found him yet, but John and Marlena are laid to rest on the property somewhere. And they think that they have an idea of where they are, but they're not 100% sure. So after the doctor passed away, then it was given to another family, the Likes family, and then it was also given to another family after that. And there was a death there where a World War I vet hung himself.
Wow.
Because he came back from the war to find out that his fiancée had married somebody else. So he hung himself in there. So it's got a lot of death and mystery behind it all the way through its history. Plus, it happened to be one of the very first drive-by shootings.
What?
And it was done on horseback, believe it or not.
No way.
The reason is, where the front door is where the person was shot. There was 12 people that they suspected sleeping with a black girl. And so what they decided to do was go kill all the white people that supposedly slept with this girl. They didn't actually know. And they got all of them. One of them happened to be Frank Saxon, who managed to survive. So he was one of the ones named in this particular thing. But that's where the first shooting happened. And then on top of it, you had the family and the people that came after the May and Saxon family that lived there and passed away as well.
So quite the history of this place. Lots of death.
Oh, yeah.
But I do have to, in my mind, I have to get this out of there. So you said a drive-by on a horse.
Yes.
Okay. So in my mind, how in the world do you do that? Just ride by really quickly and go bang, bang, bang? Or
if you've ever seen any of the old Westerns where they would come up, riding up on horseback and shoot, that's exactly what happened.
Huh.
They were good shooters. Back in this day, they still had the musket shots, but they had multiple firing rifles. I mean, you're talking late 1800s, so like 1875, something like that.
Huh.
So they had good, performance shooters. It's not like a musket where you get one shot and you're done. So that's what he did. He just drove by. There was a bunch of them on there. I think they were aiming for more people, but they only got one.
Well, that's enough, I guess. All right, so we have established this place has a real history. What is your connection with it?
My connection is I went there to visit the Brooksville Heritage Museum. and because I love old houses. And when I went in there, I had this thing that I had to go to the ghost tours, because they give ghost tours every Friday and Saturday night, and you can actually bring your equipment and they let you set up and work with it, but you have to be there with the group. Generally, there's about 8 people. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do that. And when I went there, there are some things in that house that are very haunted, and I have had personal experiences of it. One of the things is the ghost of Jessie May is supposedly haunting this place, and you can actually hear a little girl crying, playing, asking for her mama, stuff like that. And there's some toys that they placed, little dolls that were about era relative to what she would be playing with, that were there, and those things get moved all over the house. And they also, which is even weirder, get positioned in different ways, like they were being played with. The other thing that there is a crib up in the upstairs room where Jessie May died and her mom died. There, in that cradle, there's a baby. Anybody that touches that baby, everything in the house gets destroyed the next day. So if that baby is moved from that cradle or happens to be taken out of the house altogether, actual carnage happens all throughout this house.
You're kidding.
No, and they've actually had to rebuild this crib 3 or 4 times when that baby was removed. But as long as that baby's there, nothing happens in the house. So you have been known to get tugged on. You could feel somebody grabbing your leg, and you could tell it's a child. Also, up in the upper attic area where all the people died, there is a lot of stuff from a hotel that burned down the street. So there's a lot of artifacts that came in from there. But part of those artifacts was a big trunk that was for an entertainer. And so when that came in, there was a guy that moved into this house, a ghost. They call him Mr. Nasty, and he would go after all the women. And he would only attack women. And you can know that he's there because you smell smoke. Sometimes you get pushed. And so they know that's him. And also in the schoolroom, supposedly cops had driven by and said that you can see the man that hung himself in the mirror.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned to me when we were setting up today was that you yourself had some feelings there, that you were touched. Walk us through what happened to you, Emma.
So Mr. Nasty is the one that went after me. What I did was I went up into the attic and I started seeing that it was picking on people. And I said, you know what? That's not cool. We can all be friends here, but this isn't cool. So, if you're going to pick on anybody, just pick on me in this group. And what ended up happening was I got scratched right across my chest.
Oh,
and
wow.
You can actually see the 4 or 5 claw marks all the way up my chest. Everybody knew right then and there that was real. The other thing that happened to me was I had a handprint. Physically, like, remember the body glove back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what it looked like on my chest. And again, it came from above my head and downward. That happened twice in one night.
Wow.
And the next time I had an experience with Mr. Nasty up there, you can actually hear a growl and scream, which I had caught on EVPs, but I lost them, unfortunately. And the smell of smoke. I thought they turned on their furnace, but come to find out they didn't do the furnace that night. So that was the second thing that I had with Mr. Nasty. I had Jessie May physically grab my shorts and pull on them. So that was probably the only thing I really got with Jessie May. One time they had this really cool haunted house in this place. I mean, it is top of the line, and especially since there's really haunted things there. And after I went to the haunted house, I was talking with one of the docents of this museum. When I was talking to her, I felt like somebody was looking over my back. So I turned around and I saw a soldier. And I thought it was one of the people that were physically in this particular event. They were one of the actors. And I said, do you have a soldier in this thing? Because I didn't see it. She goes, no. She goes, describe it. And so I said what he looked like. She goes, oh, that's the guy that hung himself.
Oh, my
I was like,
word.
Oh, wow. And it was so close to me. It was unbelievable. The only other thing that has really happened to me at this particular place was with Frank Saxon. Frank Saxon is known to be in this place. And I kind of saw a glimpse of what I thought was a man. Now, it was so fast, I couldn't have identified it as Frank Saxon. But a few years ago, Taps, which was the original ghost hunting show that really came on A&E and Discovery and stuff like that. The Discovery.
Sure. Yeah,
Destination America. Destination America.
I was a fan at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, they came down here and physically investigated this place, and their camera, ironically, caught a picture of a guy that looks kind of identical to what I saw. Looks just like Colonel Sanders. But if you look at a picture of Frank Saxon, they almost look identical.
So you're saying the Kentucky Fried Chicken guy haunts that house?
Exactly, except for it's really Frank Saxon. So, I mean, it's a really cool experience to go do.
So, and this is open to the public. You can go experience this if you're in Tampa any time you want?
Absolutely. You can only do the ghost hunting on Friday and Saturday nights. They don't do anything on Sunday. You can visit the museum pretty much every day during the week. But with COVID, things are a little different. But Brooksville is so lax on anything. They might still be open. But a lot of the people that ran that were elderly people, in their 70s and 80s that were just kind of volunteering and trying to keep their history alive. So I don't know what their hours are, but I do know that you can sign up for the ghost tours. It's about $20 a person, unless they raise the price. And I know that they still do those, but you do have to go on the website and you do have to make an advanced reservation, because even before COVID, it was almost impossible to get on those things because of how popular this house is.
Wow, that sounds absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you for being the first guest on Paranormal Expeditions.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm really glad that we were able to talk about some cool ghost stuff and stuff that's literally in my backyard. I love talking about it.
Well, that was our first expedition, and I really want to know what you think. Please leave feedback via the contact tab on the main webpage, the Facebook page, or just drop me an email. If you'd like to share your personal expedition, I would love to have you on. Please head to ronsamazingstories.com and let me know. I want to thank Emma for being with us today and sharing her story. I will have links to the Brooksville Heritage Museum in the show notes. And this was another Paranormal Expedition. Paranormal Expedition was brought to you by Gladys Goodies. Good treats for your dog to eat. Check out their online store at gladdysgoodies.com. And don't forget to use our promo code RONS to get a 20% discount on all of your purchases. That's RONS. Thank you, Gladdy.
As read by amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have a story from the Worlds of If, Science Fiction, February 1955. It is titled Seller of the Sky and was written by Dave Dryfoos. No one took Old Arch seriously. He was just an ancient, broken-down wanderer who went about seeking alms and spreading tales of the great outside. The children were curious and believing. However, the adults were cynical and doubting. Here is Seller of the Sky, read for us by James Jenkins.
There have always been the touched, the blesses, God's poor. Such a one was Old Arch, Archer Jakes, the wanderer of the plains. They said he was born on earth in 3042 and taken to Mezapah as a child, that he learned pilotage and mining, but that he was injured in a cave-in in Haranti in 3068 or thereabouts, and then his wife died in a landing accident, and his child was taken from him and adopted by people he never could find. Those things are too far distant in time and space to be verified now. But it is a fact that by 4000, when my grandfather Hawkington Hammer was growing up in New Oshkosh, Old Archer was a familiar figure in the domed cities of the plains. He looked ancient then, with his deformed back that people touched for luck, and his wild hair and beard and ragged cast-off clothing. On his back he carried a roll of cloth he called his bed, though it looked like no bed any city man had ever seen. In his right hand he carried a staff of wood, unless someone bought it from him and gave him a plastic rod in its place. And in his left he carried what he called a billy can, which was a food container with a loop of wire across the top for a handle, and the bottom blackened by what he said was fire. It would have been like no fire any city man had ever seen. Even the water in the can would be poison to a city man. When he came in the airlocks, the guards would make him throw it away. "Why the lock?" he demanded, coming into a city. "Why the lock, and why the plastic bubble all over? Why the guards? There's no pollution. Am I not alive?" The guards would touch his hump and make circular motions at the sides of their heads and raise their eyebrows as if to say, "Yes, you're alive. But are you not crazy?" Still, they would admit him, the only non-resident to walk between the domed cities of the plains and enter all of them, the only man to pass unharmed through the camps of the outsiders, who lived in the open on the plains, at the heart of the North American continent of Earth. And Old Arch would go to the residence buildings, and he'd knock on someone's door, any door, chosen at random, and he'd say, "Have you seen the sky? And do you know it's blue? Have you felt the soft kiss of the breezes? I can show you where to breathe fresh air." Maybe the people would say, "Phew! Does it smell like you, this fresh air?" and slam the door in his face. Or maybe they'd say, "Come on around back, old man, and we'll find you something to eat." Then Old Arch would shoulder his bed, pick up his billy can and his staff, and walk down the stairs and go around to the back and walk up the stairs to the rear door. It might be an hour before he appeared there. It might be 2. When he did, the people would ask, "Why didn't you say something? You should have known they wouldn't let you in the elevator. And 20 flights down and 20 flights up again is too much for a man of your years." Then the next time he came, they would do the same thing again. In the kitchen, he would refuse all the pills and potions and shots, and insist on bulky foods. These he would eat neatly, holding aside the long white hair from around his mouth, and brushing the crumbs from it often. What he couldn't eat right away would go into his blackened billy can. The children would come before he finished, those of the household, and the neighbors' kids too. First they'd stand shyly and watch him from a doorway, then they'd press close. By the time he got through, they'd be fighting to sit on his lap. The winner would climb up and sit there proudly. One of the losers, trying to prove he hadn't lost much, might wrinkle up his nose and say, "What's that awful stink, old man?" And Arch would smile mildly. "It's only wood smoke, son." Then the children would ask, "What's wood, please? And what's smoke?" And he would tell them. He would tell them of the wind and the rain and the snow, of the cattle herds that roamed to the west, and the cities that lay to the east, and the stars and the moon they had never seen. He would claim to have been in the endless forests and the treeless plains, and to have tasted the salt ocean and drunk of the freshwater lakes and rivers. The children would have heard, in their lessons from their elders, enough to know what he was talking about. Sometimes they would tire of it and ask him to tell of the distant planets and their far-off suns. But this he would not do. "You already hear too much about them," he'd say. "I want you to know about Earth, your own country, the one planet on which these plastic-covered cities are unnecessary, where you can actually go out and roll on the grass." Then the children might ask, "What's grass?" But their fathers would pointedly say, "What about the radioactivity, old man?" "I'm alive," he'd reply. "There's no radioactivity out there." But they'd say, "How can we be sure?" "There are individual differences of susceptibility. Probably you are unhurt by dosages that would kill any normal person." And the mothers would say, "Eat some more, old man. Eat and go. Bring our babies dreams if you like, but don't try to tempt them outside. Even if it isn't radioactive out there, you've admitted it gets hot and it gets cold and the wind blows fiercely hard. Our babies were born under shelter, and under shelter they must stay, like us and our parents before us." So Old Arch would brush off his whiskers one last time, and maybe put on an old shirt the father dug up for him, and then go out the back way. In spite of what might have been said, he would have to walk 20 flights down to the ground because he wouldn't be invited to walk through the apartment to the front hall where their elevator was. Sometimes people were hostile when he spoke to their children, and they would have him arrested. And then he was bathed and barbered in the jail and was given new clothes. But they'd always burn his bed, and he'd have trouble getting a new one. And sometimes a jailer might covet the pocket knife he carried, or take away his billy can. On the whole, I think he preferred not to go to jail, except perhaps in winter when it was cold outside the city. There are always those ready to talk of asylums, and the need to put him away for his own good. But nobody was sure where his legal residence was, so he wasn't really eligible for public hospitalization. He kept to his rounds. My grandfather remembers standing in his mother's kitchen listening to old Arch. It was like meeting one of Joseph's brethren and being told exactly what the coat looked like. Something exciting out of a dream from the remote past, when all the worlds had on them those bright, moist diamonds Arch described as morning dew. My grandfather wanted to see the morning dew, though he knew better than to say so. Old Arch understood. He tried to make the thing possible, but an opportunity to see the morning dew was something he just couldn't give to my grandfather or anybody else. So he decided to sell it. He persuaded a charitable lithographer to make him a batch of stock certificates. They looked very authentic. Each said plainly it was good for 1 share of blue sky, though the fat, half-draped woman portrayed in 3 colors stood outside a domed city, pointing not at the sky, but at a distant river, with forested hills behind it. Arch sold his certificates for a stiff price, $10 apiece. He could do it, because by this time his wanderings followed a fairly definite route. The people who hated or feared or despised him were pretty well eliminated from it, and most of his calls were at apartments, where he was known and expected, and even respected a little. My grandfather was one of these. Or rather, my great-grandfathers. When Arch first brought his stock certificates, my grandfather was a little fellow everybody called Ham, maybe 7 years old. He had a sister named Annie, who was 5. He'd given me a mental picture of the two of them, standing close together for reassurance, and from an open doorway, shyly watching the old man eat and listening to him talk. When my great-grandfather bought a $10 stock certificate in my grandfather's name, my grandfather took it as a promise, and his little sister Annie was so jealous that the next time old Arch came around, my great-grandfather had to buy a share for her. As they grew to be 9, 10, 11, 12, every winter when old Arch would come around, my grandfather and his sister Annie would ask, "When are you going to take us to see the sky, Arch?" And he would say, "When you're older, when your folks say you can go, and when it's summer and not too cold for these old bones." But when my grandfather was 14, he followed old Arch out and down the stairs after the old man had paid his annual call, and he stopped him on a landing to ask, "Arch, have you ever taken anyone outside?" "No," said Arch, sighing. "People won't go." "I'll go," said my grandfather, "and so will my sister Annie." Arch looked at him and put a hand on him and said, "I don't want to come between any boy and his parents." "Well," said my grandfather, "you sold them a share of sky for each of us. Do you really want us to have that? Or you just want to talk about it?" "Of course I want you to, but I can't take you outside, boy." My grandfather was disgusted. "There isn't any sky," he said sadly. "It's all talk. The certificates were just for begging." "No," said Arch. "It's not at all talk, and I'm not a beggar. I'm a guide. But it's hard to see the sky right now because it's winter, and there are clouds all over." "Let's see the clouds, then," my grandfather said stubbornly. "I've never seen a cloud." The old man sat down on the stairs to consider the matter. "I can't do this thing to your parents," he said at last. "But you can do it to me and my sister," my grandfather charged wildly. "You come to the house year after year and tell us about the sky and the wind and the moon and the dew and the grass and the sun. You can even take money for our share of them. But when it comes time to produce, when we're old enough to go where these things are supposed to be, you think of excuses." "I don't believe there are any such things," he shouted. "I think you're a liar. I think you ought to be arrested for gypping my dad on the stock deal. I'm going to turn you in. Don't do that, boy, Art said mildly. Then take us outside, today. It's winter, my boy. We'd freeze. You've said it's pretty in winter. You took the money for the certificates. I suppose you'll grow away from your parents soon anyhow. I suppose you have to. Get your warmest clothes and meet me at emergency exit 4. My grandfather talked it over with his sister Annie. And of course they didn't have any warm clothes. But they'd heard so often from old Arch about the cold that they put on 2 sets of tights apiece and 2 pairs of socks, and they hunted for the emergency exit. They'd never been there before. They didn't know anyone who had. The signs pointing to it were all worn and defaced, and it was a long way to go. After a while, Annie began to hang back. How do we know the exit will work, she asked. And how will we get back in if we ever do get out? You don't have to come, my grandfather said, but you'll have to find your own way home from here. I'll bet I could, she said, but I'm not going to. I don't think old Arch will even be at the exit. But he was. He looked at them carefully to see how they were dressed. Old Arch sighed and led them through the lock. They stepped out into a raging snowstorm, which soon draped a cloak of invisibility over them. Neither my grandfather nor Annie had ever smelled fresh air before. It threatened to make them drunk. Their nostrils tingled, and their eyes misted over, and their breath steamed up like bath water. For the first time in their lives, they shivered. When the city was out of sight in the storm, they stopped for a moment in the ankle-deep snow and just listened. They held their breaths and heard silence for the first time in their lives. Old Arch reached down and picked up some soft snow and threw it at them. They pelted him back, and then, because he was so old, attacked each other instead, shouting and throwing snowballs and running aimlessly. Old Arch soon checked them. Don't get lost, he said. We're walking downhill. Don't forget that. We're going into a draw where there are some trees. He coughed and drew his rags about him. The city is uphill, he said. If you keep walking around it, you'll find a way in. His tone was frightening. Annie clung to my grandfather and made him walk close to the old man. It was clear that the old man didn't have enough clothes on. He staggered and leaned hard on my grandfather. They kept moving down the slight grade. They saw no sky and little of anything else. The snow was like a miniature of the city's dome, except that this dome floated over them as they walked. Its edges were only 50 yards off. Where are the outsiders? My grandfather asked. Aren't there people here? They're miles away, Arch told him, and indoors. Only fools and youngsters are out in this blizzard. Fools is right, Annie said tartly. There was supposed to be sky, and there isn't. Old Arch staggered again. To my grandfather he said, Could you carry my pack? My grandfather took it, and they went on, stumbling blindly through knee-deep drifts, getting more and more chilled and less comfortable, till they came to a small clump of trees, with a solidly frozen creek running through it. Here, Old Arch made a lean-to shelter of wind-fallen limbs. Annie and my grandfather helped as soon as they understood the design. Arch spread part of his bed over the lean-to, breaking the force of the wind, and put the rest inside. Just outside, on a place scraped bare of snow, he built the first wood fire my grandfather and Annie had ever seen. He chipped ice from the creek and put it in his billy can, and hung the can by its bail over the fire. And in due course they had a little hot tea. The youngsters felt cold but happy. The old man shivered and coughed. He'd kept moving till the tea was made. He sat still to drink it, and couldn't get up. Go to bed, Annie told him. Ham will get on one side of you, and I'll get on the other. We'll keep you warm. Old Arch tried to protest, but he was almost beyond speech. The youngsters didn't know enough to brush the snow off of him or themselves. They helped him roll up in his bedding, and crawled under the lean-to after him. They all lay in a heap, getting colder and damper and more miserable, till finally my grandfather couldn't stand it any more. He got up and looked around. The inverted cup of visibility was smaller. Darkness felt like a dye stuff, turning the white snow to gray to black. It was a bitter night, the first he'd ever had outdoors. It was the first Annie ever had, the first either had ever spent in the futile task of holding off death. They knew old Arch was dying. As the night wore on, he sank into semi-consciousness. They hugged him and rubbed his lean old limbs. Just before morning, the snow stopped. The old man roused a little, became gradually aware of his surroundings. "Go look at the sun," he murmured. "Go see the sunrise." They went out to look. Neither had ever seen a sunrise before. It was mauve first, then red, then gold, then blue. Venus led the way, and the sun followed. The moon, deep in the west, was like a tombstone to the dead night. A bird chirped. A clod of snow fell from a tree with a soft ruffle of cottony drums. My grandfather held his sister's hand and looked and sniffed at the great earth from which he'd been separated by fear-inspired plastic over his city, so near now, in the clear morning light. He climbed with Annie up the side of the draw and looked out over the snow-covered plains, stretching to a horizon farther away than the longest distance he'd ever imagined. He went back and took old Arch's head up on his knees and said, "Is it like this every day?" And the old man said, "No, each day is different." And my grandfather said, "Well, I've seen one anyhow. That's what I've lived for," said old Arch. He smiled and stopped living. Annie and my grandfather left him there and went back to the city and told the guards and their family. A burial party was sent out. Guards in their helmeted spacesuits. People heard about it and followed. Everyone was curious because they'd all seen old Arch and wondered about him. Hundreds of people went out the gate. So many the guards couldn't stop them. They saw the lean-to and the open fire and the woods and the snow and the frozen creek. They smelled the air and the smoke. They heard a bird. They tossed snowballs. And then they went back and flung rocks through their city's dome.
Haunting tale, don't you think? It describes a world living in a bubble. Remind you of anything current? Where will all this self-isolation lead us? Who can say? But dare we take the examples of the characters in our story and start throwing stones at our bubble? I leave that for you to decide. The author of our story was Dave Dryfoos. He was a lawyer by trade, having graduated from the University of California's Hastings School of Law. He spent World War II as an enlisted man in the United States Army, serving in Australia, New Guinea, and the Philippines. He earned the Pacific Campaign ribbon with 3 stars among his other decorations. He mustered out in 1946 with the rank of Staff Sergeant. Back in Benicia, California, he began writing and selling short stories to the pulp mags of the day. His publishing history extended over 6 years and more than 20 titles. He passed quietly in 2003, survived by his wife of 61 years, 3 children, and 3 grandchildren. My thanks go out to James Jenkins, who read our story today. James, you did an excellent job. Okay, that was episode 490. And Mitchell Ritchie, Emma Lynn Dowd, and James Jenkins made it all happen. I love it when a plan comes together. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.